similar to the people of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and many Asian countries, put a very high value on higher education. And one of the most important aspirations of parents is to send their children to a good university so that they can graduate with a good education and find a good job and be economically successful. So there is nothing wrong with this vision and this shared cultural value. However, when a large number of people, majority of people think the same way and send their children to universities, if the economy cannot provide enough jobs for these university graduates, then the country faces a crisis because many of them would be disappointed after graduation if they cannot find employment or if they have to accept jobs that do not match their level of education. And unfortunately, Iran is experiencing a crisis similar to many other countries where the unemployment rate among university graduates is very high. This crisis began in 1990s. In 1970s, in 1960s, when the economic growth was good and the number of universities were very small, the graduates of universities were very successful economically and they enjoyed a very high social status. This encouraged many parents to desire the same outcome for their children. And as a result, the demand for universities and opportunities for higher education was very strong when the Islamic Revolution happened. The government, after the Islamic Revolution and after the Iran-Iraq War, realized that this demand is strong, so they responded by trying to increase the capacity of higher education institutions, universities. And that was the beginning of the rapid expansion of number of university graduates in Iran. I would like to explain this crisis and how it evolved by showing you a few charts that describe this situation. As you can see here, the enrollment in universities in Iran was relatively limited before the Islamic Revolution. And when we come to 1990s, because of the policies that the government undertook in that decade, we see an increase in enrollment. One of the steps that government took in response to strong demand for university education was to allow for the creation of non-profit universities, for universities that were not part of the formal Ministry of Higher Education, and their budget was also more independent because they were allowed to charge tuition, but operate as non-profits. So as you can see here, the enrollment in both public universities and the non-profit universities grew rapidly. The largest and best known non-profit university in Iran is the Azad University, the Azad Islamic University. The number of students enrolled in universities grew from under $100,000 in 1970, 100,000 students in 1970 to well over 4.5 million students by 2013. The reason for this development is that on one hand, the demand for university education, as I explained, was very strong. And on the other hand, government responded to that strong demand by allowing for a rapid increase in the enrollment capacity of both public and private universities in Iran. Now, demand for higher education has a number of contributing factors. Commonly we say that families and young adults choose to go to university because of the economic advantage of having a university degree. It allows you to earn higher income, and also in many countries, Iran included, access to public sector jobs requires a university degree. But in addition to that, there was a strong social demand. Regardless of the extra income of going to university, there was a strong cultural perception that there is an inherent value to earning a university degree. It brings social status. It puts you at a higher level of acceptance and respect in the hierarchy of various groups in society. Another factor that encouraged families to show interest in higher education is that public universities do not charge tuition. They are subsidized by government, or the tuitions are very low. That has been the case ever since the 1950s. So the cost of going to university is relatively low if you can manage to pass the entrance exam. In Iran, like many Middle Eastern countries, there is a centralized entrance exam, which is very competitive, especially for good educational degrees such as engineering or medicine. More recently, even though the university graduates are experiencing high unemployment and their income premium compared to high school graduates is not as high as it used to be, we still see a strong demand for university education, especially Iran's top schools, such as the Sharif University, because earning a degree from a high-ranking university allows the graduates to apply for advanced education, master's or PhD degrees in top universities in Europe and United States. Therefore, there is a education demand factor that contributes to the interest of best and brightest students in going to higher education. In the supply side, as I said earlier, the government responded to the strong social demand for university education by focusing on quantitative growth of available seats in universities, by increasing the admission rates to public universities, and also by allowing for the creation of private and nonprofit universities. So if we look at the number of public and private universities that were created in Iran, we see that the numbers have increased very rapidly. There were very limited number of private universities in Iran before the Islamic Revolution, but after the Azad Islamic University was allowed to operate and establish branches in various cities and even large rural areas, we see this rapid increase in the number of universities and institutions of higher education in Iran. The result of the large increase in number of admissions to universities has been that the number of university graduates have increased in the past 30 years, but due to several factors, the Iranian economy has not grown fast enough to create adequate jobs for these university graduates. So we observe here the statistics for unemployment rate for men, comparing the unemployment rate for college graduates and those without a college degree. And surprisingly, contrary to many countries, we observe that in recent years, the unemployment rate for university graduates has been higher than those without a university degree. In the United States, in many other countries, this is not the case, and unemployment rate among university graduates is usually lower than those with a high school degree. For women, situation is even worse. Women who are university graduates suffer very high rates of unemployment, as you can see in this figure. And the gap in unemployment rate for women who have a college degree and those without a college degree who are working in the labor force is even wider. For women, in some recent years, unemployment rate for those with a university degree has exceeded 40%. Another problem that we observe in Iran is that in addition to unemployment, many university graduates are underemployed, meaning that since they cannot find jobs that are adequate for university graduates, they accept jobs which do not require university skills. In this table, I have listed a number of occupations which are categorized as what we call non-university occupations or non-college occupations, because the skills required for these occupations could be acquired without going to a college. The table shows you the percentage of employees in these occupations in Iran that have a university degree. And if we compare years 2001 to 2017, you see that in almost all of these occupations that I have listed, the percentage with a college degree has steadily increased. For example, for customer services staff, the percent with a university degree was 9.5% in 2001, but it has increased to 55.8% in 2017. This means that a large number of university graduates are qualitatively underemployed. They are not utilizing their skills that they have acquired during a university education. So the adverse consequences of overeducation in Iran include not only unemployment, but underemployment. Now, this overflow of university graduates in non-university jobs has another negative consequence. It means that less jobs are available for high school graduates. So high school graduates then end up competing for very low skilled jobs, or because it is so difficult to find a job in competition with university graduates, even in these occupations, they are encouraged to go to university. So we end up with a continuation of the overeducation crisis, because young adults say, even in order to be able to find a job in a low skill occupation, I still need a college degree. So fortunately, in recent years, in the past 5 years, there has been an awareness among officials in Iran about the overeducation crisis, because the rates of unemployment and underemployment of university graduates have been so high and so alarming. There has also been an awareness among people that maybe university education is not as rewarding as they initially thought it would be. So the changes that we are observing is a change in attitudes towards higher education. As a result, there has been a reduction in university admissions. The government itself has tried to reform the higher education by shifting from a focus on quantity of students in the higher education system to a focus on quality and relevance of the majors that are being offered. And in some cases, the government has tried to limit the admission to some degrees in which high rates of unemployment are already observed in society. So government has tried to terminate or to merge some of the non-performing universities. The Islamic Republic government announced a comprehensive reform of the higher education in 2017 to address this issue with a strong focus on addressing the overeducation and high unemployment of university graduates. But unfortunately, 3 years on, here we are in summer of 2020, little progress has been made. And the program that was approved in 2017 was supposed to be implemented in 2018, 2019, but it's still in the implementation stage because of all the political and geopolitical crisis that Iran is faced with, such as the sanctions, the US sanctions, and more recently the coronavirus crisis. Government has not had an opportunity to implement this plan. And it also appears that some vested interests in the higher education, both in the Ministry of Higher Education and in nonprofit universities, are resisting some of the reforms that are being introduced. So overall, this is an ongoing crisis, but fortunately there has been more awareness in recent years. And if we look at the number of enrollments, we see that after reaching a peak by 2015, the enrollment in institutions of higher education in Iran has been on the decline. This is partly because of demographic change, because the number of high school graduates is declining due to a reduction of fertility 20 years ago, 15 to 25 years ago in Iran. We will see whether in the future the government can create a better balance between supply and demand for university graduates. I should say that overeducation is a problem that we observe in many countries. Even in the United States, there are a large number of university graduates that have to accept jobs in occupations that do not require a university degree. Although in the US, at least unemployment rate for university graduates is lower. But throughout Europe and many Middle Eastern countries, we observe a similar overeducation crisis, although it might not be as severe as what Iran has experienced between 2010 and 2015. And I'd like to finish by pointing out that there have been a few cases in the world where governments have successfully prevented overeducation. In my studies on this topic, I have come across two countries, Singapore and Hong Kong. These are two small state nations, but when I looked at their higher education policies, I noticed that the governments in these countries, ever since 1960s, were very conscious of preventing excess supply of university graduates. And they deliberately kept the admission to universities low, despite the fact that Asian culture in those countries also put a very high value on education. So the result of that, as you can see here for Hong Kong, is that the unemployment rate for university graduates in Hong Kong has been consistently low compared to the overall unemployment rate in the economy. Here we have data from 1986 to 2016, and you can see that unemployment rate for university graduates has always been smaller than 4%. Only a couple of times it peaked and rose above 4%. This is a very good labor market condition. So I hope that in Iran and in many Middle Eastern countries, governments would look at the experience of countries that have been successful. Clearly, Iran and large Middle Eastern countries have conditions that are not similar to countries like Hong Kong or Singapore, but in any country that the government has good governance capabilities and has a public will to address this issue, I believe it can be addressed.